Welcome to Loup TV. I'm Gene along with Doug. We have a special guest here, Brian Pepin. Brian is the founder of Rune Labs. Many of you do not know Rune. You will likely know Rune in the years to come because they're doing some exciting things in health and wellness. Welcome, Brian. From a highest level, Brian, maybe we're just going to jump in here and
Yeah.
we'll start with just the elevator pitch. So kind of set the tone. Who is Rune Labs?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Gene and Doug, for inviting me on to share a little bit more about what we're up to. At Rune Labs, we deal with the problem of making neurology, and we do a lot of work with Parkinson specifically, but we think about neurology more broadly. Making neurology more efficient, bringing better outcomes there, kind of really bringing it into the 21st century. And so what we've done is built a software and data platform company that connects a lot of data that is already being generated within the sort of neurology ecosystem, things like brain imaging, things like data that come from medical devices and implants that people are using for therapy, but also things that are kind of coming from the real world, things like medication and symptom data from our app. And I think importantly, kind of motivating this conversation, very, very rich quantitative symptom data that's coming from an Apple Watch over time. And so we bring all that together, we bring that to clinicians so they can deliver better care to their patients, but we also kind of package that up in a way that we can support development of new therapies and help kind of accelerate clinical trials in Parkinson's space as well.
And that piece caught my attention related to Apple Watch, just an opportunity. We think about utility of Apple Watch and different ways that developers are trying to approach that. And so we'll talk more about Apple Watch, and I will go back an undated quote from Tim Cook: Apple's greatest contribution to humanity will be in health and wellness. And I think that the device is something, and building on top of that, that's the substance of, or a big piece we're going to talk about here. Everything you just went through there sounded super geeky. And my question is, are you a geek or a nerd?
I would probably say nerd. Ultimately, I grew up in a household with two younger brothers, and we were basically nerding out over board games and really collecting coins, rocks, whatever you can imagine all the time. So I'm definitely on the nerd side. Yeah.
I still nerd out over board games, by the way. I love Settlers of Catan. It's my favorite. It's amazing.
Yeah, preach.
It shows me I'm not a nerd. I don't know what that board game is. I should. It sounds like I should know it, or should give it a try.
That means you are a nerd that you don't know. I think actually, the roles have inverted.
Oh, it's inverted. Okay, that most people know what that is.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm proud to carry the nerd flag here. Brian, in school, what were some of your favorite topics? Your favorite subjects?
I mean, definitely, scientific topics, mathematical topics, but sort of an omnivore when it comes to knowledge. And actually, for a very long time, really, maybe starting in high school, perhaps earlier, I got very interested in the brain. So I'd always been very interested in neuroscience. I actually studied academically as an electrical engineer first, but then in my grad school gravitated over to neuroscience and ended up working. And so the intersection of the two. And that was my first exposure to a lot of these underlying technologies, to Parkinson's, and ultimately paved the way for the rest of my career. But yeah, something about the brain. It's just so complex. It's like a never-ending. Like we're never going to completely figure it out. But every little bit that we uncover really changes our relationship to medicine, to ourselves, to aging. So it feels like an exciting place to kind of just continue to come back to.
I want to quickly rewind the clock too. Here is Loup is an investor in Rune and based in our neurotech, one of our neurotech pockets within our fund. And I want to just ask Doug real quick. You're the one who championed the investment a few years ago, and what was it that you saw in the company at the time?
Our broad thesis then, and I think even it persists to now, is that the neurotechnology space is probably one of the least appreciated but most exciting spaces in technology, that I think venture, and of course the public markets too, but I think venture in particular sort of overlooks. And if you think about solving these complex problems in the brain, having the data, the appropriate data for clinicians to have a better understanding of what's happening. And to Brian's point, data from the real world, data from perhaps devices that may be implanted in a patient, bringing that all together, which is really, I think, Rune's mission. I don't want to speak for Brian, but bringing that together and giving that to a clinician to help patients, I think is really a profound way to bring technology to neuroscience. And so that's why we invested. That's why we're excited, and we're just as excited now, even more excited, with the recent Apple FDA news.
Yeah, it's a big opportunity in neurotech, and in terms of when you, Brian, described Rune, I think there were probably some listeners that would say, I still don't understand really what you do.
Yeah.
And maybe we could start, we talk about devices and implants. Can you give us an example of an implant that you would actually be capturing data from?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just maybe back up just a little bit there, but I think generally you think about, there are a bunch of therapies that are available for folks with Parkinson's. One of those types of therapies that has a pretty great
Let me
profile
interrupt
of
there.
success.
Parkinson's is one of, that's kind of the center of your bullseye today.
Yeah, Parkinson's is I think the area where we think we're going to make precision neurology work first, because we have the data to do it, and because kind of the clinician population is sort of ready to support it. But
can you tell us a little bit before we get into that about Parkinson's?
Yeah. So, and this will be relevant to even like why the watch is important, actually. But so Parkinson's, first and foremost, is a diagnosis, right? It's your clinician will observe you, they'll see a set of symptoms, and they'll give you a Parkinson's diagnosis.
When do you get that typically?
Yeah, you typically get that. Well, yeah, there is sort of, it's a little bit interesting. There's a typical Parkinson's patient because it's heterogeneous, but sort of the prototypical onset is between 55 and 65 years old. Maybe you have been experiencing some motor symptoms for a little while, but you maybe write them off as just, I'm getting older, or I'm stressed out. But at some point in time, slowness of movement or tremor starts to get bad enough that you'll go see a neurologist, and then you'll get a referral to a movement disorder specialist. Then ultimately they'll say, okay, well, you
one more
have
question on
Parkinson's.
that. Is it hereditary? Is it environmental? What
well, that is the question of the day. I think there's hypotheses kind of going all around. Certainly there are genetic risk factors. It doesn't mean that you will get Parkinson's, but it means statistically you'll be more likely to. And also, I mean, I think one of the sort of hottest topics in PD today is that pesticide exposure, for example, early in life, is highly correlated with developing Parkinson's later. And so there's a whole kind of group of folks looking at environmental toxins and their relationship to PD, as well as viruses, getting certain viruses and its relation to PD and other downstream neurological symptoms.
Makes sense. And a rough estimate of how many people globally are impacted?
Yeah, so about 1 million folks in the US are estimated to have Parkinson's. And then, somewhere between 10 to 20 million globally are estimated to have Parkinson's, meaning that if they were to see a movement disorder specialist, they would say, you have a Parkinson's diagnosis.
Okay. So let's focus on that and kind of move forward. So we have an opportunity to help. You mentioned the typical, but the typical is not very typical because there really is no typical Parkinson patient.
Yeah, and this is the kind of thing where that is really at odds with the way the care is delivered. And so if you think of what like a Parkinson's absent technology like ours has access to, somebody comes and visits them in the clinic for 20 minutes, they sort of poke them, move them around, have them walk, and then they make an assessment about how far along they are in the disease. And then based on that estimate, they'll deliver them the sort of standard, quote, standard care. And so it is kind of a one size fits all therapy paradigm for folks. despite the fact that it's a highly heterogeneous disease, people probably don't even have the same underlying actual disease. It's sort of a collection of different symptoms around. But it's one of the things where absent data, what else is the neurologist going to do? And so this is kind of where we come in, is we provide all the data and context that helps say, actually, this patient clusters with these other patients. It's specifically different in this way. And so that's going to guide your decision to make these interventions with these expectations of outcomes. And this is like a playbook that we've kind of taken from oncology, for example, where companies like Flatiron and Foundation have shown how this can work in the context of complex cancer therapeutics.
And you mentioned grabbing data. I interrupted to the question is what kind of devices can you grab data from?
Yeah, so some stuff that your listeners will probably be more familiar with, things like MRI machines, things like even in-clinic assessments of blood pressure and things like that. And then some things that they're probably not as familiar with, and probably the primary one is called a deep brain stimulator. So this is an implantable device developed and marketed by Medtronic and other companies, which is sort of like a pacemaker. It gets implanted in the brain instead of the heart. And it's really, really effective at treating movement symptoms of Parkinson's. And I would say up until about 5 years ago, 3 to 5 years ago, they were basically just that, just sort of pacemaker output. And what's changed is now with sort of Medtronic leading the way, and that's kind of our flagship partner in the space, they're doing brain sensing. So they're giving you continuous data about how the part of the brain that is most affected by Parkinson's is actually reacting in real time to environmental pressures, to drugs, to the neuromodulation itself. And that's an example of like a data source that we're seeing for the first time at a scale of thousands of patients, which again, it's a heterogeneous disease, so scale really, really matters here. And that is sort of kind of where we and our partners are kind of pushing the scientific edge of what's possible in Parkinson's care and therapeutics.
Where is that Medtronic device? You said it's planted in the brain.
Yeah.
Where in the brain is it planted?
Yeah, so it's a very deep sort of pea-sized structure called the subthalamic nucleus, and that's where most of them are implanted. There's another sort of parallel structure called the global pollidius internal segment, but these are deep brain structures that are highly connected, and they're when they kind of get pathological in Parkinson's, that's what sort of results in these characteristic movement symptoms of freezing, slowness, rigidity, tremor. It's all sort of evolving out of the basal ganglia circuitry, which are degenerating in folks that have Parkinson's.
And they stimulate that with like basically some form of like a mild shock or something, or?
Yeah, I mean, you could think about it a lot like what happens in the pacemaker. It's a sort of periodic impulse waveform, very, very low current. I mean, you can think it's directly in contact with neurons in the brain. So it's more of kind of like a gentle nudging of the network versus like ECT, which is like would be a real shock. Yeah.
Doug, I promise I'm going to give you a chance to ask the next question, but I'm just going to finish on this. I want you to talk about Watch too, but how is the data actually captured from that then? Where does it go? Is it like wirelessly?
Yeah, ultimately it's wireless. So in the case of it's different by manufacturer. In the case of Medtronic's device, the data spools to the implant. And then at each clinical visit, we upload it to our platform. So it's there with all the rest of the data, the watch data, the medication data, the imaging data, everything else.
Like you connect to a Wi-Fi network, you connect to someone's brain.
It's a proprietary medical band radio, but yes, okay. It's sort of like that. Yeah.
Okay. And then maybe talk a little bit, just since we're talking about devices right now, the opportunity with Apple Watch.
Yeah. So I think the reason that the watch is kind of important for us in this platform is it gets back to the fact that, the disease itself is heterogeneous across people, but also within people, right? So over the course of a day, a week, someone's symptoms and really how their whole disease looks might present very, very differently. And that's something that you want to capture continuously, especially in the weeks preceding a clinical visit.
Yeah.
And you want to capture kind of at scale of a lot of people. And so something like the watch, which is really unobtrusive. A lot of folks already wear it, where you can just passively collect a lot of this, becomes really, really important as a data source for being able to see that whole movie of what Parkinson's is versus just seeing that snapshot. And because we have that whole movie, now we can make all this brain data that we're getting a lot more useful and put it in a lot more context.
I think you're kind of leading toward maybe my next question, which is, you've got this kind of mosaic you're creating with imaging, with data from the brain, with the watch. How do you make that then accessible to the clinicians, and how do you interface with the patients too, in terms of collecting their data and then saying, okay, for the care provider, here's what's, going on in the brain, and now let me help you deliver better care.
Yeah. So it's all about pattern matching and sort of at the right level of abstraction. And we have a great team of healthcare designers that this is sort of all they think about, is like how to present this data in a way where it's clinically actionable. So that's kind of the number one thing for us, is how do we present data in a way where with one or two more steps, the clinician can get to, okay, here's how I'm going to update this person's therapy in a way that I think is going to be better, whether that's, changing their dose timing, changing their dose magnitude, getting them on a different therapy, maybe enrolling them in a specific clinical trial that they're likely to benefit from. Like we want to facilitate that connection. And so the whole clinician interface that we built out, which is a web app they get onto, is designed around quick pattern matching in the context of a clinical visit.
Yeah.
We also,
that's
the Strive PD ecosystem. Now we also bring some of that information back to the patient too, because patients are also trying to do their own pattern matching around exercise, around diet, and how that is reflected. So we had one person, this is a little bit anecdotal, but they were leveraging the watch and a few of the other data sources to try and figure out which exercise was the best for them, and they tried different ones. And yoga, it turns out, you could see beyond everything else, you can see changes in the brain, you can see changes in the symptoms before and after yoga, and that gave them the confidence then to double down on that and join a yoga studio and do great. Because again, kind of absent having really quantitative stuff there, it's so hard to tell, and life is so noisy anyway. But this can be really empowering then for patients too. Even though you can't, as a patient, go write yourself a new prescription, still a lot you can do to kind of manage the day-to-day, week-to-week experience of disease. So we provide some of that feedback in that context too, right into the app that the patients are using.
Yeah, so I mean, it's super powerful just to have that feedback loop where you can see real time almost how treatment is affecting the underlying disease.
Yeah, in a previous life, previous company, I was involved more with diabetes and continuous glucose monitors, and I remember we ran a study where we just gave folks who had never had a continuous glucose monitor before, we gave them CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, and then they saw their blood glucose. Just that's all we did. We didn't give anything else. They just saw it in front of them. And that was so empowering, and enabled them to change their behavior around diet and exercise. And I don't know, that was like a real aha moment for me around the power of just, again, kind of providing some of this data back in a form that it's like kind of easily interpretable, and how empowering that can be for folks, even in a relatively simple way.
Totally, yeah. Well, and like your platform today, you're working with real patients. Who are the clinicians that you're working with? Like, how did you get care providers on board with trying this new and better approach?
Yeah. So the clinicians that we're working with are neurologists, and they're actually usually a subspecialty of neurology called movement disorder specialists. So they treat Parkinson's, essential tremor, other types of dyskinesias and dystonias. Basically, if you're having problems moving around, it's neurological, these are the folks that you're going to go see. And I think, like most people who get into a subspecialty of medicine, they really, really care about the patient population. They're really, really interested in fundamentally patient outcomes and how to get folks longer, happier, higher quality lives as they're dealing with some of these conditions. And that's fundamentally where we connect. So our kind of model has been to go into hospital systems, and we're in some really like flagship research institutions like UCSF, and we're at other places that are like private clinics where they're not as involved in research, but they're just really about like high quality patient care. and we connect with the folks, maybe the first 2 or 3 folks who are going to be the early adopters. We help them bring folks onto the platform, help them get great outcomes for their patients, and then they share that success with their colleagues, and then that kind of helps us branch out and grow within these larger centers. You know.
That's perfect. And maybe just to now tie in this FDA news.
Yeah.
So, even before you had the clearance, you were working with these neurologists and patients. So what does this announcement with the FDA bring that's new? How does this kind of build on what you've already built?
Yeah, that's
and
a great question.
Yeah. And just starting at the beginning too, because I don't think we said exactly what this clearance was about yet. Maybe just a quick overview of the news itself.
So the clearance is specifically for the Parkinson's, tremor, and dyskinesia symptoms that we're bringing in from the Apple Watch, getting those and displaying them to the clinician as a sort of a biomarker for the disease, and something that they can monitor remotely. And so there have been sort of what we'll call predicate devices. So there have been sort of third-party kind of ankle bracelet, ankle monitor type devices, which have sort of served this function very narrowly. And we were able to leverage the fact that those devices had already been approved. Apple had published this really excellent sort of validation paper showing how they built their classifiers for tremor and dyskinesia. And we were able to leverage that plus some additional work to kind of provide the scientific basis for this should be equivalent, and then kind of go the rest of the way with again kind of getting all the data displayed to clinicians in the right way so that it's interpretable and take that to the approval. Fundamentally, it doesn't change exactly what clinicians see in the platform to have the approval. The first thing I think about is it's increased just kind of confidence, certainty, validation, right? Like everybody wants to know that the data that they're looking at is good, right? And we can talk about how it's good. We can point to this, paper in Science Translational Medicine to say, hey, it's validated. But just having an organization like the FDA come on and be able to say, hey, we looked at this. This looks good to us. It sort of makes it easier for clinicians to say, okay, like FDA has looked at this. I can have increased confidence in this. So that's kind of number one. Number two is that there are reimbursement codes at all the major payers that are associated with this particular class of FDA approval, this particular class of device. And so it opens up a pathway for clinicians who want to spend additional time looking at data in our platform to manage their patients to get paid for that, basically. And just structurally in healthcare, that's important to increasing access for this to clinicians. And then the sort of third one is for the use of our platform in the context of clinical trials, it expands the universe of things that this data can now be applicable for, kind of up into the realm of exploratory and secondary endpoints for a trial. So it's kind of again, the fundamental underlying data isn't different, but sort of what it's useful from a payer and a regulatory standpoint, and just from that increased confidence, it is feels like a big inflection point, I think, to a lot of our users for like, okay, like we can really lean into this now and kind of go all in on the Rune platform. Yeah.
I spoke to a different clinician related to this FDA approval, and the response was before most data that comes off of Apple Watch would be for entertainment purposes, he called it, like heart rate, for example, and your steps that you take a day. But getting FDA approval takes it to a clinical. And so to me, it's a game changer for Rune.
Yeah, I mean, judging by the state of my email inbox this week, I would have to say you're probably right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good signal.
And when you think about kind of building on that, well, first, when is best guess of when an actual app will be available for Apple Watch?
So it's all available. So right now we're distributing it basically through hospitals and clinician sites that we're already partnered at. So if you're at UCSF, Mount Sinai, Duke, a number of 20 other institutions that we're already at, or another 20 institutions will be at by the end of the year, you'll probably hear about us from your doctor, or you can tell your doctor about us. Either way, we have a wait list on this. The platform is called Strive PD, STRIVE PD. Patients can go to the wait list to sign up, as can clinicians. However, we are working very actively on a sort of version of this that can be more kind of quote direct to patient. Call it, by the end of the year, early 2023. That again, like folks won't be able to use necessarily like prescribe themselves medications, but will still be useful, especially for maybe people that are a little earlier on in their disease, just to kind of understand what's going on and have something really quantitative they can share with a neurologist or movement disorder specialist. And that is, I think, kind of a segue into where we really want to take this, which is, and what kind of the most exciting thing about the Apple Watch to me is that there are, last I checked, something like 8 million Apple Watch users over the age of 55 in the US. And statistically speaking, 2/3 of 1% of those 8 million people is going to go on to develop Parkinson's. So I would like to use the Apple Watch.
Say that number again, 2/3?
2/3 of 1%. So that would be something like 500,000 to 600,000 of those folks are going to go on to develop Parkinson's maybe. And so I would like to leverage the Apple Watch and the fact that we know what these signals look like in a PD population to go and look for early signs of that in that 8 million person population, especially because we're at a point in time in the history of medicine where we can actually connect those folks with clinical trials for experimental medicines, which are possibly neuroprotective and may slow down or prevent these folks from ever having to develop Parkinson's at all.
Pretty
right?
Powerful to catch it early. Could someone who has not been diagnosed the app or prescribed the app, could someone go and download it on the Apple Watch App Store and just try it? And could you use it as a way to kind of as a safety mechanism that you help catch it early?
I would say not quite yet today. So right now we are focused on the PD use case, and we have the Apple Watch features turned on specifically when you're partnered with a clinician. And then, but like I said, the kind of where we're going is more in line with what you're saying there, Gene. And we would like to. It's one of these things that we're interested in exploring sort of next is something that is like these very, very large heart health studies that you've seen on the Apple Watch that folks like Johnson & Johnson have partnered on and Bayer have partnered on to go find 100,000 or 400,000 folks with the watch and build these pipelines for something like atrial fibrillation. Okay, well, we'd like to build that pipeline for like early Parkinson's, for example.
Awesome. And how do you make money?
Yeah, so the model that we've taken is, again, kind of lifted from oncology, folks like Garden and Foundation, which is the sort of companion diagnostic model. So we partner with people who have complex therapies, which are underpenetrated, which is sort of universally true for any complex therapy in neurology. And we help those folks, do a better job, help neurologists do a better job of delivering those therapies so that they're getting better outcomes for the patients that are on them, but also kind of helping to in a very data-driven way target folks who are a good candidate for those therapies and are very likely to benefit, because we can kind of see the pattern of their symptoms. We know that the pattern of their symptoms and maybe their brain data is similar to other folks in ways that we think are important that have also benefited from these therapies, and we can just kind of do that. We can do that matching. And I would say that also sort of applies to, again, kind of finding folks that may be a particularly good fit for a certain clinical trial and bringing them to the trial, and then helping to make those trials run in a very data efficient way as well. So, I think in healthcare, you're either sort of partnering with payers or you're partnering with therapeutics providers if you're looking for where the money is concentrated. And I think our interests have been fairly well aligned with the therapeutics providers that we help basically actually deliver their therapy. Yeah.
And that would be it'd be on a monthly basis that you'd be compensated. It's kind of a subscription business.
Yeah, I mean, it's our sort of baseline unit is per patient per year.
Per patient per year. Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Makes a ton of sense. Doug, I'm going to give you the opportunity for a final question, and then I would like the honor to wrap us up.
Well, maybe just my final question is, I always like to think about kind of where the world is going and how, Rune is really changing the world. And this may be a controversial statement, I'm not sure, but I think the brain is our most important organ, because many people maybe think it's the heart, but if you think about your day-to-day life, like literally this Zoom call, somebody watching us on YouTube later, their brain is processing the stimulus, auditory stimulus, visual stimulus, cognitive, understanding what's going on. And to the extent that our brain degrades, and that is, more or less what Parkinson's is at a very, very, very high level, the degradation creates such an impact to quality of life that, I don't think we can overstate the importance of trying to solve this problem. And if we think about human longevity and quality of life, understanding the brain and being able to treat the brain, I think is sort of paramount to delivering on that. It's not just pharmaceuticals, it's not just physical. And so I leave with that kind of intro to say, you guys are very much creating, I think, where the world is going in terms of preventative health, as we talked about, maybe finding Parkinson's early, and also quality of health once you have a disease. And in that context, like how do you think about the next maybe 5 to 10 years of evolution of neurology, and what will it look like in 10 years? How will we be living differently?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that kind of came to mind as you were kind of talking is that I think for a lot of people, Parkinson's is actually the best model that we have for human brain aging. And some of our biopharma partners, I think, are fundamentally, like, at a very high level focused on slowing and stopping brain aging, but they're sort of stopping off to say, okay, well, if Parkinson's accelerated brain aging, these therapies we're developing should work in Parkinson's patients first, and we should be able to see that slowing before kind of maybe adapting. So I think that kind of acceptance and blend, that, I mean, sort of everything that we've learned about the brain, I feel like that's really useful has come from treating brain pathologies. Like if you go into a neuroscience textbook, like everything that we've learned about the human brain, it's like from somebody who accidentally had this part of their brain removed, or this and that.
Yeah. And
so I feel like as we really figure out what's going on in patients with Parkinson's, especially at the level of the underlying brain data, but again, all this other context is important. We're not only going to figure out how to treat those symptoms and hopefully how to kind of cure and slow the progression of the disease, we're going to learn some things that are pretty fundamental to things like aging. And that to me is especially exciting. So that's, maybe not the next 5 years, but that's, I think, really the journey for the next 10 to 15 years on the neurology field is kind of along that axis.
As Abraham Lincoln said, there's not much I can add. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you for making the world a better place with all of you, Brian, you and your team's work. And thanks for taking the time. Being a nerd, you can make it the conversation palatable for the dinner table too. So appreciate that. On behalf of Brian, Doug, and Gene, bye for now.